Welcome to Liberty Sound with your host, Ryan Hill.
There can be a new world order out there. We've got to lead it.
And I'm going to nominate Donald Trump for Speaker of the United States House of Representatives.
Our country can be saved, but I really believe that if some things don't happen, very important things, very soon, it can no longer be saved. You know, once it goes over the precipice, it's not going to be savable.
But while we may be in a period of uncivility, it's not because of you or me. It's because there are other miserable people who find meaning in anger. It's activists, it's media, it's politicians. It can help their careers. It gets them clicks and followers and retweets.
Good day to you. Good afternoon where I am. Perhaps it's good evening or good morning or good night where you are, but any place or time you are listening, you're listening to Liberty Sound. Coming up today, we're going to talk about some of Trump's interview with OAN that was last night. There's a development in a New York situation relating to election fraud, and I'll give you my reaction to Trump's answer in that interview on the vaccine mandate question. Should be a good show. Stick around. First of all, where you can find this show, I'm broadcasting live on Podbean, but it will be syndicated through there later onto Podbean and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, TuneIn Radio, and I think another place called Podcatcher, which goes who knows where. And then I also put it on Rumble and YouTube later. Stay tuned in the weeks and months to come. I may have some more exclusive content on the video channels. I may do something different on YouTube versus Rumble, etc. We'll see how things go. They've been pretty nice to me lately. You can see the description and the notes from the show and a couple of links that I may provide in the show notes itself. So wherever you're listening to this from, just look down there in the description and you should see some extra stuff. Or not extra, it'll just be related to what we're talking about. You can also find me on Truth Social, on Gab Social, and Telegram. I think it's just Telegram. And Twitter. I tweeted this week. I tweeted one time. How about that? Proud of me. And then there's an auto tweet that goes out when I go live on this program. So you may have found your way here from there. So that's the housekeeping. Boy, there's been a lot of housekeeping today. I'm telling you, just events have seemed to conspire against me. I don't know if it's the universe. I don't know if it's the local subset or what. But on Tuesday afternoons and Tuesday mornings, I have distractions galore, some of my own making, but others that just like I wasn't planning on a lot of the things that happen, and then sometimes they come in and next thing you know, oh no, the show's about to start and I still have to get my sound bites uploaded, or usually it's like in the midst of working on, I try to edit those sound bites the day of or the night before, which I was doing in this case. And boy, it's just like, you know, you'll have a phone call, you'll have an animal incident. I've had some dogs getting into my yard from a neighbor's yard through like some fence areas they've broken down and had to repair that. Not today, thankfully, but I think it was last week. While I was on the show, there might have been dogs in my backyard that were not mine, but don't worry, they've made it back home, and we didn't have to put them down and assume that they had rabies like the fox in Washington D.C. earlier this year. But I'm told that this is all a sign that I need to keep going. Because whenever you set out to do something that you know you're supposed to do, or you feel like is your calling, or you really have this inspiration that I believe God inspires us. I believe that the desires, the good desires put in our heart come from God. And when you have those desires and you act on them, and you're moving the direction that your life arc perhaps should go, that's when all of the resistance comes. And the resistance is trying to get you to quit, to go do something else, just go back to what you're doing before, because you're making a change. And there's internally and externally, there's all kinds of, reasons why you might not want to make a change. And so when you do, you get that resistance. But I believe that's true. You've got to keep going through that. So despite the distractions and the, like I said, some of them are self-induced because I try to do too much at once and all that, but you got to keep going. And so that's what I'm doing. And all this talk too, just about mission and calling in life, believe me, if I knew precisely exactly what it is, like, hey, I'm supposed to be this, or I'm supposed to go, do this type of career. I'll use my sister as an example. She's a music teacher. She's always known her whole life she has this love for music. It's what she does. She's incredibly talented, and that's what she does for a living. Well, I've never really had a particular thing like that I feel is, I mean, I do believe in callings. I believe that God will have, your life is unique. We're all special snowflakes in some way, right? At least there is some truth to that. But not everybody knows, okay, well, I'm supposed to be this. Sometimes you just have to take it a step at a time. And that's really mostly how I would say my life has gone. If I had taken what I thought I was going to do when I was 16, what I'm doing today is something completely different. I mean, I thought I was going to be a Navy pilot at one point in my life. I do love flying, but it's kind of an expensive hobby on the private side. So there's a lot, and I just wanted to say a quick word about that. Maybe you're listening, and you're like, "What do I do with my life?" Well, I don't know. Okay, I don't even know what to do with my life, but I do know that if you trust in God, and I'm speaking, of course, to people who are believers of some sort, but if you trust God day by day, step by step, He will guide you. I guarantee you that. I can't tell you what it's going to be like next year. Nobody knows what tomorrow is going to bring, but we can take it day by day, and you can have confidence in that. I may have something else to say about that coming up later. Now, let's jump into a few headlines for today before we get to those hard hitting topics. Let's first off the bat, these are all related in some way to liberty. And that is the theme, of course, of this show, as we talk about stories that impact our liberties and, thinking about it. Sometimes I have interviews with people. And so we start off today with the widely reported news that Canada is lifting their travel restrictions as it relates to COVID, but I'm not really celebrating, and I'm going to tell you why. So it's effective October the 1st, which is like next month. And the reason I'm not celebrating, although I'm glad that they're lifting the restrictions, it seems like just about everywhere, at least in the Western world, has kind of already done that or is in the process of ramping things down. That's great, right? Isn't that a good thing? Well, it's good in the sense that if you want to travel and you don't want to have to put up with all the nonsense, or maybe you don't think it's nonsense, but you still don't have to put up with all the stuff, there no one has relinquished their authority, have they? They are continuing to assert, or at least, by de facto reasons, they have the ability to lock us down. They have the ability to say you cannot travel on an airplane unless you follow certain restrictions and, get tested or put a mask on or whatever. I don't know. I haven't flown through a major airport in quite some time and didn't really want to during all this time because I'm just not going to deal with that stuff. I've got enough stress as it is. But I understand, for business travel and other things, people have got to, it's either like, oh, am I going to lose my entire career or am I going to put a mask on for 2 hours? Well, in my case, I actually chose to lose my career. So it's up to you. You can make your own decision. I was not in the airplane industry, but I was in an office building that had zero customer contact, and really hardly anybody was even in the office because everybody is still like trying to work remotely and things like that. And I volunteered to go back in, but after a period of time, I decided that, hey, I've had enough of this mask business, and it's my personal health decision, it's not yours. And so once I made that decision, the company I worked for made the decision to say your services are no longer needed. Now, recently somebody said, why don't you sue? And I have brought that up, and actually several people have mentioned recently, why don't you sue? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. How am I going to find a lawyer? Name me one lawyer that's going to take this case? There was one in Oklahoma where I live, in like the Tulsa area, that some guy fell off of a ladder, but I never heard the result of that lawsuit. I mean, I think he was suing like for occupational hazard or something like that, and perhaps his fall from the ladder was accelerated by his lack of oxygen and concentration of CO2. But you'd probably have to be able to prove that medically, and talking about it, I'm getting more stressed out than I have been since the time that I walked away from that job. I guess I did walk away from the building, but the job walked away from me because I didn't quit. But anyways, it did enable me to be here. So I'm kind of glad in some ways. And if I had spent all my time trying to sue over that, then I wouldn't have had time to do the other things that I've been doing. And it would have caused me more trouble than it would have the company. And it's just, it's one of those things like, I don't know, if I thought I had a slam dunk case, maybe I would have gone for it because it needs to send a message, because this kind of thing is, in my opinion, a usurpation of liberty. Sorry to use a $10 word on you, but it's they're taking liberties that don't belong to them and asserting them as though they do. And we, the people, just kind of, for the most part, sit back and say, okay, well, just what do I have to do? And I couldn't take enough of it. So Canada, we're talking about Canada, not me, but Canada has lifted the travel restrictions effective October 1st. But we really should pressure our elected officials and our governments still to say, that's great that you lifted these restrictions, but as long as you have the authority to institute the restrictions, the problem's not solved, because there's going to be another crisis. And I've been telling people for a while too, it may not be a health crisis the next time. It could be something else. I mean, we're talking about world war with Russia and Ukraine and all that stuff going on, which we will get to here shortly on the program, and some sound bites. Donald Trump has talked about his opinions on that, and we'll go through some of that as well. There will be some reason for a lockdown, for a quarantine. If it's not a quarantine, if it's not health related, it could be ideological. There's all kinds of things, and the precedent has been set that the government can restrict your travel. It's American Airlines, or it's Delta, or it's somebody that's flying the plane, but the government is the middleman in between you and the customer and them, the service provider, saying, nope, you got to do this, that, and the other. I'm not even talking about metal detectors and security and TSA and all that stuff. That's a separate conversation. And I'm not against having security in airports, but this is just one more thing on top of it. So speaking of Russia, let's move on to the next headline topic. So Edward Snowden, remember that, the contractor, the NSA contractor who divulged, it's been a long time. I mean, I'm having to remind myself, okay, so what happened was he divulged information that a lot of people argue should have been, should have gone through the internal channels, but he went straight to the public, or I forget how he released it exactly. And we found out that our government, not necessarily the military, but like the NSA and the civilian justice services. I don't know if you can call it that, but the civilian services were using our cellular data to track Americans without warrants and without our knowledge. And I don't know if this came out at the same time, and the cell phone companies were willingly handing this information over, despite the fact that they have promised customers that we won't give away your private information. They tried to cover over this by saying, well, it's just the metadata. It's just the metadata. It's not, it's not your phone calls recording. It's not what you texted, but it is your location data. And it is the fact that you made a phone call. It's the numbers you called. It's the people that called you. And this is the kind of stuff they can pull up that in the past would have required a warrant. But now with all the technology, they can just go grab it in bulk. And then the majority of us in the country that I live in the United States, we said, well, that's okay. I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't have anything to worry about. It's those terrorists that we're worried about. Remember, this was a decade closer to the tragedy of 9/11, and we had the war efforts, that were ramped up pretty heavily in Iraq and Afghanistan and all of that. And so a lot of times it's the same thing with, like I'm saying about, the travel restrictions. We put up with it because enough of us were afraid of the pandemic that we said, well, this is actually going to be good for us because we're so scared. And we were scared of terrorists, so we had to bring in all that other stuff. And then part of that was the government spying and all that. So Snowden has been granted Russian citizenship. How about that? So it's been widely reported, and he is, I don't know where he is. I thought he was in Ecuador, but that shows how much I keep up with the tabloids these days. And I'm still torn on, was Snowden a hero or a traitor? That's always been the question. And I'm afraid that those are the arguments that we get trapped in. I'm going to Greg Gutfield clip for you to play in a second about the way that we argue and maybe the way we shouldn't argue when it comes to politics. But on this one, it's like, yeah, we're trying to figure out, did he betray the country by revealing this info? Or did he save the country by preventing us from being taken over in a police state without our knowledge? I don't know. I think it's maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle. So I thought I would mention that. Let's see here. How did this link get in here? I've already got this page open. Inside the billionaire's doomsday bunkers, secret subterranean palaces with enough food for 5 years. Some even have a fake park to walk dogs in. I guess that's an underground park. Okay, here we go. This is why I brought it in. As Putin threatens nuclear war, how tech tycoons are sparing no expense to survive an apocalypse. So that's a pretty cool story that on an ordinary time we would spend much more time on, but I've just got it as a passing headline for us today. But a little bit from the article, the prospect of a nuclear strike on Britain has never seemed more real, with Vladimir Putin and his henchmen threatening to obliterate London and other Western capitals in the latest escalation of the Ukraine war. That's the first I'd heard of that, but it's probably from his comments that I think he mentioned the nuclear word, which I'm told you're not supposed to mention. On Sunday, Russian state TV aired threats by Andrei Gurilov. I don't know. I never read that name before, so I don't know who he is. He's a member of the State Duma. And taking particular issue with the UK, he called it the root of all evil and suggested that it could be turned into a Martian desert by Russian nukes. So that's Russian state TV. Putin himself warned this is not a bluff. However, I don't think that that's directly related to the previous comment, but the article is nonetheless written as though it were directly related. So that's all going on, and apparently the super rich have these nice underground palaces and survival bunkers. I'm looking at a picture here in the Daily Mail. It's got a very posh looking like bar and pool table set up and kind of a lounge. Looks very comfy. So I won't be going there in the event of an apocalypse unless like the ground opens up beneath me and I see one. But as far as I know, they're not building anything like this around here. So it's good to be the super rich in this day and age, I suppose. I don't know. I somehow think they're having kind of a tough time as it is. Have you looked at the stock market? I'm not looking at it now, but it was down yesterday and it was down this morning. And you shouldn't really, if you're trying to keep your sanity, you shouldn't watch the day to day. I'm not doing day trading or anything. I'm just curious to see what's going on, and it's bad. It's pretty bad. It's things have got to turn around, and I don't expect the stock market to go to zero. Some people are really freaking out and being like, "Oh no, got to take all my money out and put it into gold." I've heard all these gold advertisements, but let me tell you what happens is so the stock market has lost some in general, about 25% of its value this year. We're officially, as all the reports are going out today, that we're officially in a bear market. For the Dow, I thought it already was, but I guess it was NASDAQ and the S&P that were. And now the Dow is officially in a bear market. It's lost 20% of its value from a recent high. So if it has done that, and while it's down 20%, you convert to gold. What do you do when the market goes back up? Because eventually, probably, it's going to go back up. And if you sold everything, well, you locked in your losses. It's like saying, hey, I bought this house for $100,000. And now the housing market's, had taken a dip in my area. I can only sell it for 50. But the reason that the housing market took a dip was because there was a sewage overflow and it flooded the neighborhood and the whole neighborhood smells like sewage. You say, that's gross. And so you sell the house, somebody buys it for 50. Well, in 6 months, the sewage is all cleaned up and the housing values go back up to where they were, and now it's 100,000. Well, guess what? You just lost 50,000, and the person that bought it from you just gained 50,000. So it's kind of the same thing. Does that make sense? Like if the market's down and I cash out and I go buy gold, then the market goes back up and I say, oh no, I want to get back in. So I get back in. Well, now the market is potentially 20% more expensive than it was before. So it's really kind of a wash when you think about it. You still own, if you had single stocks or something and you didn't touch them and they went down, you still have the same number of stocks. And so you have to keep that in mind. People don't understand what it is they're buying when they're participating in the market. Or maybe you've stayed out altogether. Maybe you've been smart like my dad and you've gone the real estate route. But even that, depending on how you do it, can have its risks as well. I think really the wisest solution is just to spread your investments around of whatever type they are. And this is not investment advice; it's just life advice. You don't put all of your eggs in one basket, whether that's the crypto basket or whether that's the Dow Jones basket or the real estate market. Doesn't matter. Just be wise with your investments, and you got to start somewhere. I think the most important thing is that you just save, period, because again, the market's going to go up and down. And by the time you retire, though, is really kind of what most people have in mind with saving. By that time, there's going to be a lot of things will have smoothed out by then. I'm sure by the time I'm 60 or 70, that we're not going to be having Joe Biden's not going to be in the White House when I'm 60 or 70. I can guarantee you that. That would be really weird. So enough about that. So billionaires, doomsday, Putin bad, save London, and diversify your investments. Now, moving over to just about the other side of the world here. So Shinzo Abe, who was assassinated tragically this summer, and I can still see the video in my head, just out in the street he was running for office again. He was running to go back in and become the prime minister. He was prime minister of Japan for some 9 years, 7 years, 9 years, and of course tragically killed this summer. Well, the state funeral took place today, but in preparation for today, I was looking at this story that the nation was divided in some way, Japan, on whether or not he should have a state funeral. And I thought, that's weird. I thought people liked him. I mean, I know that he got voted out of office I think maybe he stepped down for health reasons or something like that. And so if that's the case, then he didn't even lose an election. And I mean, who hates him enough to shoot him? I still have questions about that and what exactly happened there. Well, here is a story from Metro that is out of Tokyo, or at least I guess it's an AP report out of Tokyo, but I'm reading it from Metro. And it says a rare state funeral for Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister who was assassinated in July, has split Japan. The hawkish Abe, so there you go, they're kind of gaslighting in this article. The hawkish Abe was one of the nation's most divisive post-war leaders, but it is the ruling party's cozy ties with the ultra-conservative Unification Church that has fired up much of the opposition to the funeral. Well, why would there be? Does that make any sense? Like, if you're not from Japan, I'm not, never been there. I think it'd be kind of cool to visit sometime, but and I've had friends in and out of there, but why would they be divided about a funeral? Well, it has to do with old ancient traditions or I don't know if it's ancient, but old traditions of Japan, and when they do state funerals. So the article says that the tradition has its roots in a ceremony performed by the emperor to honor those who have made exceptional contributions to the country. So far, so good. The emperor before World War II was revered as a god. And public mourning for those honored with the state funerals was compulsory. Most state funerals were for members of the imperial family, but political and military leaders were also honored, including I really should have read this before I came on here. Isoroku Yamamoto, who commanded Japan's Pearl Harbor attack and died in 1943. Okay, so now the stage is set here. So it just sounds like a state funeral. I mean, for crying out loud, we've had state funerals here in the U.S. recently, and though they had some controversy on CNN and Fox, most people didn't really care. I didn't care. Okay, some of you were perhaps upset. That's great. It doesn't really bother me if somebody gets a state funeral. In fact, the one I'm thinking of, Trump was, widely expected to deny that because of his political differences. But in the end, it's good, I believe, to honor the dead, whether they were a great person in life or not. When you're dead, you're dead. Okay. And the books can be written and we can write the bio of people's lives, and you can have the good and the bad, but we still honor life. And in Japan, they really care about that as well. So I understand now, having read this, why it was kind of a controversial thing to occur there. nonetheless, it did happen today or overnight, and I've watched some video of it, and it was really kind of touching. I mean, I got a little bit emotional just watching. There was a box which I assume contained the ashes of Abe that were being carried forward, and I mean, I got a little bit choked up. Like I had a lot of respect for Shinzo Abe as a world leader. I thought that he was somebody who put his country first. It's the same thing I said to a UK friend that I met in a North Carolina Trump rally in 2016. He was checking out the whole Trump thing, trying to see what is this all about. And I said, don't you want, like, Brexit had just happened actually, and it's been a few months only since their referendum vote, and I was like, don't you want your country to put itself first, like have policies that benefit the UK? We want policies that benefit the US, and then we can help other countries. And I feel like Abe was much of the same. So I don't really have. I'll put a link to that article about the controversy, but I don't have like video of the funeral from today. What I do have is some audio coming up next. So we've gone from Europe to Asia. Now we're going to go to space. Did you hear about the NASA asteroid crash? So I'm going to play you, prepare yourselves. I'm going to play you a little soundbite from the crash. Let's see, I added it just at the last second. So NASA has been catching the craze of running into celestial objects, and they wanted to get their piece of the action here. And so yesterday, out of nowhere, nobody was asking anything, and NASA said, "We're here to crash into an asteroid." Now, this is what it sounded like in the control room as they were making the final approach. You won't be able to see it because I don't have the video going right now, but the one day soon, hopefully. But it's just a really like one frame per second being sent back from this satellite or this rocket or whatever it was that was going to go into the asteroid. And you see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger in the screen. And as it's doing that and it's about to crash, here's what you hear in the control room.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. 8,
Yeah.
7, 6,
wow.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
Awaiting visual confirmation.
All right.
All right. Let's see. We got it?
Okay. There.
Waiting.
All right, that's enough. So loss of signal, but did you hear like the elation and the uncontrollable excitement? Oh, it's getting closer. The picture's getting bigger. And okay, great. So it's very exciting. I recall when wasn't it like a private group, or was the European Space Agency or something, where the guy was wearing like the Hawaiian shirt with the naked ladies on it, and he was the architect or the programmer or something behind that asteroid crash. And then he got, of course, deplatformed and canceled because he was, too much of a chauvinist for science, evidently. And so now NASA is getting their piece. But I just have one thing to say about this, other than just to inform my listeners that was going on, is, can we please stop crashing into celestial objects and bodies? I have a feeling that maybe it's not a good idea. What's going to happen to this comet now, or this meteor, whatever it was? I put it as an asteroid crash, but I think asteroids are like way out there. They're not close enough for us to crash into just yet. But can we land on one maybe? But what's going to happen to the orbit from crashing into this? Are we now going to have a meteor strike on Earth in another 1,000 years? Like, what exactly are the consequences of this? And from the people who are so concerned about the climate and the sea levels and all the things happening with the weather, they have no concern about crashing into asteroids. I don't know. It just escapes me. So that is all happening. Now, speaking of things that escape me, I've got a little soundbite here from Bernie Sanders to play you. Yeah, he's still around. He's actually still like a senator. I hope you know that. He ran for president. He's still a senator. But so is Rand Paul. I mean, can they not do that? I suppose they can. Now, one thing I will say about Sanders is he does occasionally, if not frequently, point out problems that are real problems that deserve to be talked about. But let's listen to this real quick, and I will opine.
Enough for Democrats to run on in the midterms, or do you okay?
No, I don't. Look, what we don't talk about in Congress and we don't talk about in the media is what's going on with working families in this country. And the truth is that the middle class of this country is falling further and further behind. Wages are not keeping up with inflation.
Okay, so there's more to it than that, but that's the extent of the clip I was able to obtain. I wish I could get the rest of that sentence. But he points out something that's true. The middle class in this country is not currently keeping up with inflation. In fact, I remember from my last days in the corporate world that I was going through this process of sometimes you will get a big responsibility change and you get a raise, or you will internally move from one position to another, or you'll move from one company to another, and you might get a 10% raise. You might get a 20% raise. That sounds great, and people love to celebrate that. And I've seen a raise of that nature at different points in my career. One time when switching companies, and one time when switching jobs internally to something that was at a higher skill set, because I had obtained some skills that were valuable apparently. But then outside of those, the yearly review process, or some companies have like a semi-annual or a quarterly kind of review. Usually your pay raises, if they occur, are going to happen like once a year. Well, I would get a raise of maybe 2.1%, but then inflation would be 2.1%. So it wasn't really a raise. Especially when the raise is happening after the fact of inflation. Inflation is continuous. The raise is only once a year. And there wasn't much that could be done. And sometimes, it's not necessarily a company's fault that they don't have more money to give, everybody, right? Everybody wants more money for doing less or doing the same thing. That's, it sounds like a good deal, I guess. But the reality of it was that my wages were, I would say, keeping par with inflation or barely keeping up with inflation. Now, inflation is so rapid and it's happening at the 8 to 9% range, at least according to the official numbers. Some things are going up even faster than that. Some things have doubled in price, such as gasoline, for example. And while at the same time, like the price of lumber I just saw has gone back down to its lowest levels of this year so far. And that's nice because I had to actually buy some lumber just a couple weeks ago again. And I was able to get twice as much for less than the price I had paid the last time. So that's good. That's going to be good for housing builds, and maybe we'll get some new houses built. Of course, that's going to affect the markets and everything too. But all of this up and down, and the average being kind of at the 8% level. Well, unless your wages are raising at that 10%, remember 10% for me was getting a new job. It wasn't just showing up and doing my job a little bit better in the next year. I'm not going to get a 10% raise for that. And I doubt that many people are right now. So your raises are probably in like the 2 to 5% range. I think that's the average, right? For office workers of that nature and all. And maybe just, in general, it could be the rate. But it's not keeping up. Now, unfortunately, Bernie Sanders is going to have a solution to this problem, which I will not agree with, which his solution is always more socialism. We've got to have socialism. That's it might be funny on a night show, and it might be a good, late night talk host topic to go on. But in the real world, the socialism is actually what's causing all the other problems. Now, barring the price of oil, and I don't know if socialism is really the root cause of oil being high. I could do some logic pretzels and try to get you around to that, but there's probably some roundabout connection. But even under other non-socialistic practices, you can still have fluctuations in the market and turmoil and war and conflicts across the country or across the world. But that's what's going on there in the late night world. Those are my topics and headlines for you this week. I think that all does relate to liberty, except maybe the NASA asteroid crash segment. But it was still fun, wasn't it? So now let's move on to some little bit more in-depth topics that I want to get into today. I hope you like the Greg Gutfield show, because I've got a little bit of his monologue from last night, and he brought up some really good points. I want to play some of that, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. he's mentioning kind of the state of the political discourse in this country. So consider the following.
So, you've been hearing from the media about domestic terror and perhaps even a coming civil war. It's all baloney. Kat's marriage is fine. So, let's debunk the bunk. First, you're only being called terrorists because that's all they can call you, so get used to it. I get called a toxic male all the time. It's crazy. I mean, you dismember one postman. But they try to erase our message by demonizing the messenger. Trump's Hitler, DeSantis is a Nazi, Shannon Bream is evil. We know that's true. We do this, but our hearts aren't really into it. And we don't control the bullhorn, they do. So when a Democrat asks for more funding for stupid crap, sure, we'll call them socialists. And when they shake invisible hands with somebody, we'll call them senile. Clap! How dare you? And when they want more than just sex ed in schools, we call them groomers. To be fair, some of them turned out to be true.
We go back a long way. She was 12, I was 30, but anyway.
I'm glad he didn't complete that sentence. He'd be serving a sentence.
All right, I like that last part there, and I honestly I don't even watch a show live. I usually just catch the bits that people share of it afterwards because I don't have cable, and I don't please nobody buy me cable. I don't want it. It was a choice. I disconnected it in 2017 because I was tired of feeding that system. But he brings up a really good point. The left has no qualms about taking the low road when it comes to political discourse, and they label their opponents racists, demagogues, deplorables, even. And what do we do in response? Well, usually we try to take the high road. I listened to just a brief bit of Mike Gallagher's radio show this morning, and he was talking about the point of, or a caller, I think, had called in, and they were debating on whether or not Republicans should take the high road. Now, the caller was saying, we just need to focus on the things that we're for, how we're going to fix this country and restore a sense of normalcy, and we need to stay away from this, dirty name calling and all this stuff. But Greg Gutfield brings up this great point, and I think Gallagher was on the side of the same thing, same side as Gutfield here. The two G-men, I guess. No, we have got to fire back, and when they call us deplorable, racist Nazis, that should be. We have to meet the level of firepower with an equal level of firepower. It's like Reagan talked about peace through superior strength or through superior firepower, something like that. I don't know. I always say peace through superior horsepower because that's the great equalizer on the roads. But that's what we've got to do. It's not wrong. It's not immoral to lobby a pejorative at somebody who is doing that to you. Now, is it good playground practice? Maybe not, but we're not talking about the playground. We're talking about people that want to make policies and want to enact them, and in many cases take your liberties or implement socialism, and they will misrepresent their side to only tell you about the good outcomes they want to see and not tell you how they're going to do it, not tell you what the cost is going to be, not going to tell you what the long-term implications are, because half the time they don't even know. What we're just supposed to sit here and say, well, we want to lower taxes and, we want to make it easier on business and we want to be good people and go to church on Sunday. Well, okay, I don't want to slap down any of those ideas. I think those are good, but you have to fight fire with fire. So moving on from that particular topic of it, he mentioned the Civil War aspect, and there are people that are talking about Civil War. Well, I think this is an important thing to talk about too on our program here, because I'm not for civil war. I'm not for using violence to solve our political differences. In fact, the only time we've really done that in this country was actually a few times, initially to secure our freedoms in the first place, because the government that was oppressing us would not hear our redress of grievances. They would not. They were continually enacting things on us that were oppressing us, and it got to the point that there were armed conflicts. Okay, and we fought a war, unified. The colonies fought, unified, became states, and established governments. We fought again. The next time was the War of 1812, which was kind of like a redo war where Britain was still not recognizing, even though they said they would in the Treaty of Paris, they were not actually recognizing our sovereignty. And actually, if you read the Treaty of Paris, it may not say exactly what you are accustomed to thinking that it said. And that's a rabbit hole you can go down, but it's there. And I've got a copy of it in a book somewhere, but in my vast library that is growing so slowly these days. But I try to find good books. I don't just want a bunch of books. I want particular ones. So then we had the actual Civil War. Okay, so are we headed for another civil war? Well, I don't think so, and I don't think that's where most people are at in this country. Gutfield agrees with me.
And now there's talk of civil war. According to CBS reporter Major Garrett, no relation to Mrs. Garrett on The Facts of Life, although the likeness is uncanny. He claims that America is on the brink of civil war, which is not entirely hysterical if you never go outside and you always live your life on social media. At times I feel just like him, but then I get off Twitter and I walk outside and I see that everything is cool. And then I run back inside because I forgot that I was naked.
Okay, yeah. And don't do that, by the way. That's gross, especially in, packed cities like New York City where he was. And I had actually cut some of this out because it's a really long clip overall. So when we're on the internet and on social media and in comment sections and in Twitter replies and things like that, or Truth Social replies if you've moved over to that platform, and frankly Facebook and Gab and probably Gitter and all the rest of the platforms, it's really easy to think that this country is about to fall apart and we all hate each other, and it's the people in this group over here and there's people in that group over there, and they don't interact. But he points out, and it may be in this next bit, but it may actually have been in part of what I edited out. We'll see in a second. When we go to work, like the workplaces I was just talking about, it's a mixture. You've got people who are on the left, who are kind of on the left, but then they also are kind of on the right when it comes to this, that, and the other. You've got the libertarians that are, pro-abortion, but they want taxes to go away. So it's like there's a mixture of ideologies that are out there, and we're not all in these silos like many of the times it appears we are online. He also talks about unity, and it's kind of what I just said. And so as the holidays come up, keep this in mind too.
But if you watch The Five, Jesse's family is a mix of left and right. They're like the Baldwins with less chance of gunplay. During the show, his mom texts pointed defenses of liberalism while chastising her son for conservative commentary. I believe Jesse's dad is a headmaster, his sister a liberal dean at a liberal college, which is really redundant. And yet Jesse is a right-winger. He's the black sheep. No offense to the black sheep community. I'm friends with sheep of all colors. So how do you have a civil war when everyone is mixed up with each other? It's the question that keeps Joe Biden's speechwriters up at night. And politics isn't everything. It's not even close. We place so many things above politics. Family, friends, my ego. So how can creeps start a civil war when family and friendship matters more? Well, it's obvious. It will be the creeps without family and friendship, and they'll use race to do it. Because if you can't break people up based on politics or class, race is the best and last resort. It's the catalyst for the riots, which were like mini civil wars, except no one fought back. So the Democrats and the media see that and think, why not go with a proven formula? Race is the chosen avenue for discord because the others allow for crossover. Maybe this is why you're seeing this new segregation being pushed by the left in schools. Separate classes for non-white students, separate graduations, separate dorms. Because if people mix, well, you might eliminate that road to conflict. But while we may be in a period of uncivility, it's not because of you or me. It's because there are other miserable people who find meaning in anger. It's activists, it's media, it's politicians. It can help their careers. It gets them clicks and followers and retweets. And it might scare you enough to buy a book. To which I say, save your hard-earned money and spend it on something more worthwhile, like my next book.
Ha! Good landing there, Mr. Gutfield. He's not wrong, folks. He's really not. But I have a question for you, and that's about the high road and the low road. Is what should we do when you're sitting at your Thanksgiving dinner this year and you have some ad hominem attack thrown out about all conservatives, everybody that's ever voted Republican, and they hate women, are you going to just sit there and say, well, I don't hate women? Or are you going to actually throw some facts into the discussion? And, the person on the opposite side of the dinner aisle and the political aisle in your family may not like it, but my take on the thing is it's rude to throw out the initial ad hominem attack. It's not rude to respond to it. Now you can respond to it gracefully, okay, or with, a measure of grace at least. You can try, but to ignore it, I don't think that's what we want to do. So we've got to move on here, running out of time, and I want to get some of this Trump interview in here as well. But before I get to that, there is an update on the New York voter fraud situation. And this is from a Telegram post. So I'll have to give the link to Telegram. You can't actually view it in your browser for some reason. So if you don't have Telegram, I'm sorry, you may not be able to catch this one. But there's a group called electionfraud20.org. They've been around since the early days of, looking into the 2020 election. That's hence their name. And I've heard of them, and I don't necessarily follow them, but I've seen much of their info. They've got a nice website that's got a lot of details out there, kind of like True the Vote, kind of like some other organizations that are around. And here's what they are saying, and it's in an Epoch TV interview that is, you have to be a subscriber to get that, but they've got a little info about it. In New York, it's been discovered that the voter rolls may contain over 10,000 cloned registrations. What does that mean? In the interview, Roman, the person being interviewed, sat down with Marley Hornick, director of New York Citizens Audit Team, which is another state level group. Good to hear our friends in New York are pursuing this issue as well. I'm sure it's much worse there than it is here, but in terms of voter fraud. Hornick revealed some very alarming findings her team uncovered about the New York State voter rolls following the 2020 election. Hornick revealed that upwards of 321,000 New York voters had multiple invalid voter registration ID numbers attached to their name with their address and date of birth that could have only been created by somebody with official access to the state's election software. Without seeing the interview and knowing more details of it, this leaves me with a number of questions, not the least of which being, how did those 321,000 get there? What exactly are these cloned registrations? Because that could probably mean the same name, the same social security number, or whatever it is they identify people with in that state for voting, and in perhaps multiple locations. So you go check your voter history and you see, oh, okay, let's see, I voted here, here, and here. But unless you thought to check the clone of your name that you didn't know existed, you would never know if that name has been voting. And then there's other, questions about these artifacts of why are there invalid registration IDs attached to 321,000 names? What's going on with that? This is exactly what we have been saying in the Oklahoma Liberty and Integrity Group, which is that our voter rolls are a mess. Even here in Oklahoma, we've got some 65,000 or more. It could be over 100,000 at this point, like discrepancies with the voter registration rolls, and with like when the elections come around, there are absentee ballots requested but not returned. And in 2020, it was to the tune of some 60 or 65,000. There are other numbers since that election. It's not just the 2020 election. So with all this going on, we're still dealing with this. Okay, so don't expect in November to see just this amazing result with this red wave. And I think that a lot of people have been cautioning against that, but probably not for this reason. We've got to look at our voter rolls. Call your legislators in your state, not necessarily the U.S. representative and U.S. senator, but look up in your jurisdiction. If you're in, Wisconsin, where they have an assembly, or maybe that's Minnesota, I think it's Wisconsin, that just has like a general assembly, or whether you are in a state like mine that has a partisan House and Senate, you need to contact your local representative and say, we have seen nothing done with our voter rolls. We keep hearing talk that they're going to clean it up, and it's never clean. There's always problems with it. OAKLIG, or Oklahoma Liberty and Integrity, we're advocating a reset. We want a great reset of the voter rolls. Okay, we want to have everybody go back. If you want to vote, and maybe not November at this point, but in 2024 or even before 2023, we want everyone to have to re-register. And there was a piece of legislation that would have made that happen, but unfortunately, it was stripped of all of its, better parts, and whether or not it passed, it didn't matter because it wasn't going to do what it originally was going to do, which is clean up the voter rolls. So, and to those who say this is so messed up and I'm just proving your point that there's no point in voting, well, what is your alternative solution? Because let me tell you, brother, sister, unless you've got one, okay, suggest it to me. Find me on Truth, find me on Telegram, find me on Gab, put it in the comments on one of the channels you listen to this show on. What is your solution? What are we going to do besides vote? That is the system that we've set up in this country since its founding. And there have been a lot of changes to that system. There's been suffrage movements and all of this has gone on. But basically, we agree in this country and in most countries that practice democracy or are republics such as ours, but we practice democracy. It's true. We do that. The way we express our voice is through our vote. So if you don't vote, then how can you challenge the outcome? If a Democrat gets in and you're a Republican, or let's say you're in Georgia and you're a Democrat and you voted for Stacey Abrams and a Republican gets in, how can you even have a right to complain about that if you didn't do anything to try to participate in the process? I'm open, I'm all ears if you've got something, but I've never heard a solution outside of the voting process, other than going back to what we just talked about. And it's kind of like that quote that those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Did I get that quote just right? I don't know who said it. At some point, there is a breaking point, but we're not there. Okay. Now, when we have a Boston Massacre moment, which actually some might argue we did on January the 6th, but it wasn't just the Boston Massacre. That was before the revolution. They did not go to war and sign the Declaration the next day. There was a lot that had to happen before then. So I wish I could move from that to just like a happy-go-lucky topic, but now we're going to talk about the FBI raid a little bit more. I wanted to get Trump's own words about this. I know he's done a couple of interviews since then, but he went on OAN and talked to Dan Ball, who was a host that I think his show, I don't know if it's moved time slots or whatever it was, but he replaced the other guy that used to be on before him, the guy that was always right. I can't remember his name now, but he was pretty good host. And Dan Ball is much in the same direction. He's a good guy as far as I can tell. So here's him talking to Trump about the FBI raid.
How are you, Bear and Melania, the family, doing after the FBI went through all of your personal effects, took things they weren't supposed to take, and just violated the sanctity of your home?
Well, it was a shocking thing, and everybody was surprised by it, including the public. And it's not acceptable, and it hasn't been acceptable to the public. You see that through the polls and through every other form of looking at it. And it was... They've been weaponized. They've been weaponized against Republicans and conservatives and people like you and people that we know so well and people that are great people in this country, great citizens. They've weaponized the Justice Department and the FBI at a level that nobody's ever imagined possible. And I really think that I don't have to think. People are extremely angered by it. They don't believe what's happening to our country.
How are you?
Okay, got to stop it right there so I can get this next bit in because it's very important, but I also want to finish on time. And I've already talked about the FBI assault raid. You know my feelings about that. But I want to address the topic of the vaccine mandate because I know that's brought up a lot. And I know that people who would otherwise love Trump have a problem with the vaccines. And I've got two sides I want to present to you about this. So briefly, let me play his answer to... I'm really glad that Dan Ball was pressing him on this because he kind of deflects. Listen to this.
But now on the backside, looking at the side effects we're seeing from the vaccine and how Fauci and the rest of them, I believe, lied to you and lied to the country. Would you have done things different, and how will you move forward if you get back in charge when it comes to COVID, the vaccine, and all these mandates that liberals put in place?
Well, I never locked down. I let the governors decide. That's the federalist system. But I let the governors decide, and many Republican governors, if you look at South Carolina, he's fantastic, and Tennessee, and a lot of them, they didn't lock down at all. And you had some states that didn't. I let them decide. The Democrats really locked down. I mean, they made it impossible. They, imprisoned their state. So I didn't lock down. The mandates were terrible. What they did with the mandates were terrible. And that was almost exclusively, I don't think totally, but almost exclusively done by the Democrats. As far as Operation Warp Speed, I mean, I've been given great reviews on that by a lot of people. We did an incredible job. You know, when we handed it back.
Okay, so did you notice he didn't answer the question? The question was about, with all of the side effects that we now know about, that and Dan Ball gives him the kind of the out, is that I believe you were probably lied to by all these medical professionals who told you everything was great. His answer is that he just talks about how great it was that we got this done so fast. So initially your response might be, well, see there, he's endorsing the vaccine. He's saying how great the vaccine is. And although I've never heard him say that it's bad, he has taken back from touting that so much, because I think he's gotten a lot of, pushback from his supporters that don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm one of them, by the way. I do support Donald Trump. I'm one of those ultra MAGA types, right? But I'm against not only the mandate, but I'm against the fact that, why did we skip all the safety trials? Okay, and he's now, actually what they did was they had the trials going on simultaneously with some of the development. But part of the reason you have those safety checks is because if it's not safe, you want to stop before you've already started manufacturing the cocktail, whatever, the vaccination cocktails. They've got to make changes to the formula. They've got to go back to the drawing board. They've got to, stop modifying our RNA and reverse transcribing our DNA. So there's more to that. He's actually asked 3 times and never answers the question. Frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed. But at the same time, here's the other side of it. If Trump had not done these things, we would have been locked down through the end of his presidency, and we kind of weren't. Things were, they were not back to normal. They're still not back to normal. I've talked about Canada. They still have the authority. A lot of states have taken this authority and never been legally challenged on it, so they will do it again. Those are the things I have a problem with, but I guarantee you we would have been in an economic death spiral while he was still president if we were not on the perceived road to recovery. So I wanted to put that in there. I wish I had more time, but we are basically out of time on this. We can talk about Russia and Ukraine later as well, but Trump's point on that was basically like, the question was, what would you do now that we're in this situation if you were in charge again? And the question is usually asked like, well, how would you negotiate? What would you say to these world leaders? His answer to that is also not a direct answer, but it's a good one, because he says, if we got the price of oil back down to $40 a barrel, which is what it was at one point during his presidency, we would not be having this war with Ukraine and Russia. That would solve it like immediately. It's all about energy and who has the control over it and who is going to be able to afford to put, it's kind of like a siege. When you do a siege on a fort back in olden times and old battles, you would try to cut off their supply lines and everything so that they wouldn't be able to eat. And then eventually they have to surrender because soldiers that starve can't fight. Amazing how that goes. But we're going to have to leave it there for today. And of course, we'll be back next week, same time. You can catch this on all the platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe and walk in liberty. See you next time. Outro music, Chase, by Alexander Nakarada. Royalty-free music used under Creative Commons License 3.0 and 4.0 International, creativecommons.org. The Liberty Sound podcast is produced in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Copyright 2022, Ryan Hill and Liberty Sound. All rights reserved.